Okay, so let's get started. Today there are two guest lectures, so I'm very happy to have two experts coming and talking about their particular application areas. So here's Bengt qvist, professor of practice at the Department of Electrical Engineering, and a long-time industrial leadership person in the area of medtech, I would say, in general. Yeah. And lately it's been a lot of ICT related stuff.
Exactly.
So looking forward to this. Without any further ado,
no, I will give a short presentation myself. Thank you, Erik. Yes, my name is Bengt qvist, and as Erik said, I'm professor of practice here at the Electrical Engineering Department, but that's not the only thing I'm doing. I'm also running managing a pre-hospital ICT arena, which is an open collaboration platform for developing and making sure that we use ICT in the best way in the pre-hospital care, and that is run at Lindholmen Science Park. I see that it's not correct here. I'm not longer research area director for SAFER, which is also an open innovation arena working with the traffic safety, but I left that not fully a year ago. And I also have my own company where I do some consultancy work now and then. So, as Erik said, I've been involved in medtech, and this is just to give you an idea. I started here at Chalmers many, many years ago right now. And the reason for that was that I wanted to do medtech. I thought that was a fun thing. And I kept straight on doing medtech all my life. Both here as a researcher and as an entrepreneur, finding some new ideas, for instance, for transmitting ECGs and stuff from ambulances to hospitals. And I've been part of that company, Autovus, who tried to sell that all around the world, mostly in Europe. So I've been engaged in marketing and trying to set up marketing strategies, etc., for bringing out e-health commercially. But I left this company in 2012, and after that I started to build up what I'm doing right now. It is the work I do here at Chalmers and also at Lindholmen. And this thing about Lindholmen with the pre-hospital ICT arena is very much based on my experiences from trying to bring out medtech and e-health into real healthcare, because that's a tricky thing. I usually say that the technology is the simple thing. It's the other stuff that takes time and is very difficult. You don't know, for instance, about business models that will work in different countries, etc. So that's a hard thing. And I also understood that we need to find another way to collaborate between academy, industry, and the healthcare sector if we shall really make use of all the good things that ICT can provide for the healthcare sector. So you will see something about that. Today I will talk initially a little bit about e-health, what it is and why it has become so interesting, you would say the last 15 years or something like that. Something about the drivers that is related to that, but mostly I will focus on what is called pre-hospital health or pre-hospital digital health. There is a lot of words around in this area, so you will hear something about that as well. So, to start with, what is e-health? Do any of you have any idea what e-health is? No, not a clue? I think there are as many definitions as you would like to if you go out to look at Google, for instance. Several thousands, I think. But for me, I usually say that it's the use of information and communication technology to improve care and promote health, because it's such a wide theme. But here you have some examples. You have heard a lot probably about electronic patient records and stuff like that. That's one thing within e-health. It could be about having different types of clinical decision support systems. Nowadays we talk a lot about artificial intelligence being used in this type of systems. You can involve things like bringing care closer to the patient. Well, you have now one example with those apps, qvist and My Doctor and whatever they are called, but there are also other ways to using ICT to bring care closer to the patients. It could also be like follow-up of chronic disease and other things. Very much is about improving care processes by exchanging information between different parties in a care chain. and in this case illustrated by pre-hospital care, which I will talk more about later. And then we have things like health promotion. There are, numerous apps out there that in one way or another is designed to promote health. And there are some tricky things about this, which I will not go into today, which we will learn more about, for instance, in the e-health course in the master's program, if you take that. But there is always a need when you design something for medtech use that it has to fulfill the CE compliance regulations, that it is a medical product. And there is a tricky thing with all those apps, because a lot of them does not fulfill the regulatories. If you produce an app and say that it shall be used for medical purpose, it is a medical product, which means that it has to follow all the regulations, including clinical testing and stuff like that. So it's a tough thing to do this, and not a lot of those that are out there are not fulfilling those criteria today. Okay, so here are some definitions on what e-health is, and I think this is so interesting because what is e-health? Yes, you can see a lot of different terms here. And then in the end they say, and many other ICT-based tools assisting disease prevention, diagnosis, treatment, health monitoring, and lifestyle and management, blah, blah, blah. It could be very much. The only thing that is common for all those definitions is that ICT is involved in one way or another. And here is another way to describe it. And you can see here are a lot of other names as well. We talk about ambient assisted living. That is a term that is used for instance, assisting elderly or people having different kinds of handicaps in their own homes. So it's also part of this thing. Telecare, M-health, that used to be things that used smartphones. Mobile health, it's called. We have telehealth, we have telemedicine, and a lot of other things. Special disciplines like teleradiology and telescreening. Teleradiology is to use X-rays to look at them, for instance, at a distance, or exchanging X-ray information between various places. For instance, in Sweden there are regions that don't have their backup for examining X-rays, so they send them to Barcelona for looking at them, and then they get the answer back what is on the X-ray. And in fact, that service goes around the world, so they change during the day. So sometimes they sit in Barcelona, they can also sit in Australia and somewhere else. So you send the information there and get feedback on what they see on the X-rays. We have also something called welfare technology, and that is also very much about helping people in their own homes to have an easier life. If you have, for instance, a handicap, if you're elderly or something like that. And other terms that are related to this, which is more or less used, is, for instance, digital health, which has been very popular right now. We have health informatics, which also is about the same, but more of an academic term, and sometimes people think it has a lot to do with things, how you represent data, how you represent different types of diagnosis and things like that. But it could also cover almost what's on this slide. P-health was something called personal health sometimes, and there are many, many more. So there are a lot of words around, but again, ICT is the common denominator here. And this is also something that you probably have heard of, the digitization or digitalization of healthcare. What's happening now is that the healthcare sector is going in the same direction as all other business in the society, that more and more digital solutions are used for you as maybe a patient that you can contact digitally, or by having more and more digital support in all processes and collaboration between different actors in the healthcare sector. So there are a lot of different articles out now around this and what it will bring to us as citizens and how it will help healthcare sector. And I would say that we are right now in the middle of a very, very big transformation of the whole healthcare sector, where this digitization process is one of the most important things. Right now, if you look at healthcare in Sweden, regionally or a national level, but also international, they usually refer to 4 different things that is very important right now. First, it is to bring care closer to the patient. So there is, for instance, more focus on the primary care. We shall do more in the primary care. We shall have more patients staying at home instead of being at the hospital. That's one thing, which of course then needs IT support in one way or another. It's more centralized and specialized care, so that there should be separate hospitals doing different types of specialized operations, for instance. Not everyone should do everything, because that gives not the quality results that you need. So centralization and specialization is another thing. The third part there is digitalization, and the fourth thing is improved healthcare quality. That is that we want to have a better outcome of what we are doing. Now, another question to you. Do you think there is any specific e-health technology? No. Anyone has any idea?
Perhaps.
Perhaps. That's a good thing. I don't know if there really is. It might be if you look into like terminology or security solutions, or there are different standards for making different systems being capable to cooperate with each other to change information, for instance. But I usually say that it's mostly standard technology and it's applied in a specific context. And of course that means that whatever we invent or whatever we find in the ICT sector can be used in healthcare as well. But it is the context that tells us what to do with it. So therefore, if you should be successful in this, you need to understand the context. Start looking at the context. Where shall this be used? Who shall use it? And things like that. And then we can look into our engineering toolbox to see what tools can we use to make this happen. But again, it's not the technology that is most important. It's understand the context in which the technology shall be used. And these are examples of things you need to look at. For instance, which care of medical needs is it I'm supposed to handle or support? Who are the users? Very many people talk about that we shall get elderly and elderly. We will have more elderly in the homes, but what type of equipment can they use? They cannot use smartphone, maybe because they cannot see, or they are having problems with their, what is it called, tremor and stuff like that. So you need to have this in mind when you design stuff. Also legislation, as I mentioned briefly, and a lot of other things. So again, to be successful in this area, you need to be able to understand the context in which these solutions shall be used. Now, the drivers. Why has e-health become so interesting the last, say, 15 or 20 years? Time goes quick. So I don't really remember. Maybe it's even 20 years now. From the beginning, e-health was restricted to using internet for education, I think. But then it became wider and wider and covered everything. But this is one of the things that it has become so interesting. And it is that this article or book was presented, I think, around the year 2000, when people realized that in the United States, somewhere between 44 and 98,000 people died each year due to mistakes in the healthcare sector. Unnecessary deaths, because people die in healthcare, that's for sure. But this was unnecessary deaths. And they started to look into this and say, why is it like this? And they found that in many, many cases, it had to do with that they didn't have efficient information at hand when they made the decisions, or they had the wrong information. So they thought that maybe by using ICT or IT in one way or another, we can make sure that we have all relevant information available when we need to make a decision. And then they carried out studies in other countries. And this is from Sweden, and I have translated a little bit here. But in this study made by Socialstyrelsen, which is, I'm not quite sure of the English version, they found that there were about 3,000 deaths a year in Sweden. Some say there are 4,000, and that differs. But it's almost the same amount in all countries, or if you take it in relation to the number of people living there. And as a comparison, we can say that in the traffic we have about 300 deaths a year. And there we have a zero vision. But as I said, we have 3,000 dying in healthcare just due to mistakes. So I think that we should work on a zero vision for the healthcare sector as well. And here is another driver which I have briefly mentioned, and it's what they sometimes call the age quake. That things are changing in the society right now. There are getting more and more elderly people, and it continues to grow, and especially in relation to the younger people. So there will be less and less people providing the money that should pay for the healthcare for the elderly people. And this is something we need to do something about. So, and the reason is also that we can handle much more diseases. So people live longer, but they have multiple diseases which are chronic, that they need to be treated for the rest of their lives. And there is a big problem in finding also enough of people to work in the healthcare sector today. There is a lack of people that can help all those people. So we need to do something to change this. So how do we want to address this? Well, we want to reduce the errors and increase the quality, of course. And we need to find new ways to provide healthcare then. For instance, then, as I mentioned, more care in the homes and more centralization of special care. And also, we want to promote people staying healthy by various programs and ideas around that. And all these are things that are making the interest in e-health to grow. And this is from the World Health Organization, and it's a couple of years old now, but you can see that 58% of all the member states have an e-health strategy. And there are 55% that have legislation to protect electronic patient data. And there are 87% that has some kind of national strategy on this. So very much focus from authorities on this. And in Sweden, we have something called a national e-health strategy. And the first strategies was presented around, I think it was 2005 or something like that. And now we have someone that is focusing on the year 2025. And when we look into this strategy, there are three things that are pointed out. It is about patient empowerment, that we as patients shall have much more availability to information about ourselves. It should be easier to get in contact with the healthcare sector, and there should be more information available, for instance, via internet. There should be different type of support for the policymakers, like regarding statistics, the outcome of different treatments and things like that, and more support for the health professionals in various ways, communicating with each other and other things. And so we have something called the Vision for eHealth 2025. And this is interesting because the idea is that in 2025, Sweden will be best in the world at using the opportunities offered by digitization and e-health to make it easier for people to achieve good and equal health and welfare. And I don't know if you can compete in being best in e-health, but the important thing here is that this should really do what is underlined here, to make it easier and to get in access with healthcare and to have a more equal care, no matter where you live in this country. And there are three concepts used in this work, which I think is important to have in mind. One is how they define e-health, and that is according to the World Health Organization. They talk about digitization, what that means, and they talk also about welfare technology, which I mentioned. And these are used and defined in a very good way in this paper, I think. And I'm partly involved in this. I'm party in an advisory board they have. We meet a couple of times a year and discuss various topics. So that's like a background about what e-health is. And it could be applied to any area within healthcare, and there are so much around. But I will focus on what I call pre-hospital e-health, since that is what I have been mostly involved in. But is there any questions so far? Okay, then we go ahead then. This is how I started with pre-hospital e-health, but we didn't know that that was the name at that time. At that time, we didn't even know that it was called telemedicine. So It's me and some other guys here in a room over there in 1986, when we had the idea of using something called Mobitex for transmitting ECGs from ambulances to hospitals. And Mobitex was something that was developed by, at that time, Telia and Ericsson, later Ericsson. And it's said to be the world's first dedicated packet switch mobile data network. And it was introduced in, I think it was introduced in 1986, a little bit after this photo was taken, because we had the chance to test our ideas before the networks was launched, because we knew the people developing it. And the whole background for this thing was that I met those guys that were developing Mobitex at the party. And we discussed if we could use that for something for medical purposes. And they told me then that this mobile data network would cover the whole of Sweden, and all blue light services would use it. And that sounded pretty good. But things that didn't sound that good was that it was a very low bandwidth, 1200 baud. And imagine trying to transmit the running ECGs with a 12 lead and 12 bits resolution, 500 hertz sampling frequency. That doesn't work. But we had to be a little bit clever. So what we did was that we did a lot of signal processing in the ambulance and just transmitted the results. Because since we had contacts with cardiologists, we asked them, if you, for instance, have a suspected myocardial infarction in an ambulance, what do you need to see in order to make a judgment? Well, I need to see if there are something called ST elevations, and I need something about the rhythm, etc. Okay, then we do the analysis in the ambulance, and then we just send the results that's necessary for this doctor to look at. And by that, we could manage to handle this low bandwidth and still get very important clinical results. What is very interesting is that we already at that time had this idea of designing a system for collecting, analyzing, presenting, and communicating clinically relevant information between an ambulance and one or more hospitals. And by using this system, improve the care provided in the ambulance, prepare the receiving hospital, and enable operational clinical follow-up. This vision is 30-year-old, and it still holds because we are not there yet. There is still more information we can send. We started with ECG and some basic information on the patient. Today we send complete electronic patient records. We have different kind of other supports that is transmitted. And as I will show you later, we have also introduced using real-time video between ambulances and others in order to improve the care in the ambulance. So this is what this system was later called MobiMed. And this is what that looked like. That you can say that the process and this MobiMed product started to be used in the ambulance when we got information from the dispatch center where they send out the alert to the ambulance. We picked that up and had a computer in the ambulance. Later on, we could move that computer with ECG monitoring equipment, etc., out from the ambulance, for instance, into a patient's home, and all the time transmitting information to a hospital or several hospitals where it would be possible to look at the information. And we continued to transmit during the ambulance transport and could make judgments on where to take the patient or prepare the hospital in advance for what was coming up, or as I will explain later, even initiate treatment in the ambulance, which could not be done if we hadn't had this communication. And in the end, we got a lot of information that could be used both by the ambulance service and by the hospital itself if we integrated the information with the electronic patient record. I have left this company some years ago, 2012, but it's still around there. And it looks a bit different than when we started. And today there are some 1,700 ambulances around Europe that has this equipment. And the biggest installation is in the UK, where there are some 1,200 ambulances running this with electronic patient records and stuff like that. So, pre-hospital care, what is it then? Do you have any idea of that? Just by looking at the word, it's something that happens before a hospital. So, but there are a lot of things that can happen before you reach a hospital. So we usually look at care change from an incident occurs until we have taken care of the patient or others involved in this incident at the right care level at the right hospital. And this means that this has a lot to do with mobile health care. So, and it takes place outside an hospital, of course. Ambulances, helicopters, sometimes airplanes and boats are involved in this. And this sector also covers what I sometimes call the small incident as well as the large incident. A small incident can be if one of us gets sick and, for instance, need an ambulance. But it could also be a large incident, for instance, a terror attack or a big catastrophe, where a lot of different ambulances and other blue light services need to cooperate in order to make things work in a good way. So this depends very much on cooperation, interaction, and information exchange between many different actors and stakeholders, and also many different systems. So if we shall be able to share information by all these systems in a good way, we need to be able to use good standards and things like that. So good and interactive ICT solutions is a good thing if this shall work in a good way. And if we look at this and just focus a little bit on what could be called time-critical pre-hospital diseases that we need to handle, so we can give you a fair idea on what numbers are we discussing here. Well, for instance, if we look at acute myocardial infarction, we have about 25,000 individuals a year that gets a myocardial infarction in Sweden. And today the 30-day mortality is approximately 25%. It's a big decrease. When we started in the 90s, since then we have gone down with 50%. And I will comment a little bit more on that later. We have stroke, which I focus a lot on right now. There we have some 25,000 new cases a year, where 20% die, and around 30% get so much injured that they cannot cope with their life by themselves for the rest of their life. They need to have assistance for simple things like eating or going to the toilet or whatever. And the rest of the 50% may or may not have some kind of problems. We have something called sepsis, which commonly is called blood poisoning, but that's not really true. But sepsis, there are some 40,000 individuals a year with a death rate around 20%. And this is something that people don't really know about. And we have trauma, like traffic accident or people falling from roofs or falling from other reasons. In all this, there's more than 100,000 individuals with a mortality between 20 and 25,000. And I would say that about 60 to 75% of these cases have their first contact with the pre-hospital care, usually ambulances. So what we do in the ambulances with those patients has a lot to do what it will be the outcome after they have been treated. And again, coming back to those 300 people being killed in the traffic in comparison to 20, 25,000, I think it's very motivating to work in this area. So, and of course, time to correct treatment and correct care level is essential in all these examples. So why is this things happening? Well, this demographic things is very important here as well, but aging is not the only thing that the change factor that makes it so interesting to look at the pre-hospital sector. Because one thing is that we are changing the way we are working. Very much is about, as I mentioned probably, having good decision and making sure where we shall take this patient. We talk a lot about different type of care change, for instance, for acute myocardial infarction, stroke, etc., etc. Which hospital is the best hospital for this type of patient? Where does this patient get the best treatment? It might not be the nearest hospital, it could be somewhere else. And if it's a geriatric patient, maybe we should not take them to the hospital at all. Maybe they are treated best in their own home. We can treat them there and leave them at home and then do something else. So there are a lot of different options what to do with the patient. And the important thing again is to make a quick and correct decision and take the patient to the right place. And this is usually what we look at when we work in this area, is that we look both at what we call incident assessment and prioritizing. That is, the easiest thing to explain is if there is a traffic accident. Here we need to decide how serious is it, how many ambulances do we need to send, or is it not that we need to send an ambulance at all, because it could be solved anyway. They can take a taxi or whatever. But it could also be that someone calls from an elderly home saying, we have a patient here that has suddenly got much worse. Please send an ambulance, because we think they should go to the hospital. But maybe they shall not do that. And then we have a lot of things that we can do in this end during patient assessment and care. If we do a transport, which hospital shall we go to, etc. So we look at the complete care chain. We look at providing correct treatment at correct care level and making sure that all relevant information and support is available when needed. And this is like our thesis is increased decision precision. And our vision is that we shall make no mistake in patient assessment and prioritizing. Because if we have good information, we can reduce the risk from doing this. So I will spend the last 15 minutes or so giving you some examples on what we do. Starting with myocardial infarction, since that was where I started. The thing here is that these are very old figures, but they still hold. And the general thesis is time is muscle. The less time, the quicker it goes, the less myocardial muscle will die. Because what happens when you get a myocardial infarction is that the blood flow is stopped somewhere and you get something called an ischemia, and that kills the cells later as time goes on. And if it's very serious, depending where it happens, you can get different types of rhythm distortions and things like that, which can kill you directly if you are unlucky. And you can see from these fingers that if you can start something called thrombolysis, I will tell you a little bit about that later on, within 1 hour from this has happened, you reduce the mortality with 40–50%. But you can also see as time goes, the chance of reducing mortality goes down very quickly. So again, time is of essence here. And those treatments that are available for a myocardial infarction patient is something called thrombolytic or thrombolysis, where you give some drug that dissolves the clot in the coronary vessels, and then when the flow is re-established, it's better again. And the other thing is something called balloon dilatation, or PCI, that you bring in a catheter in the arteries, and then you take away this clot that stops the blood from flowing. And this needs to be done in an operating environment. That's nothing that you do like in an ambulance or something. This drug can be given in an ambulance. And everything is, as I said, about time. So if someone gets an infarction here, it's a downward slope all the way until you do something to stop it, and then it probably gets a little bit better. And if you look at the delays here, you can see that first we have a delay at the home when the patient doesn't think that he is so ill. And then you have a transport delay, and then you have a hospital delay. And when we started to work with this, we noticed that just the hospital delay was about 30 to 180 or more minutes. So if you came into the emergency department, it could take you some hours until you were given the treatment in the right way. And with that other figures in the back, you can see that that was a catastrophe for the patients. So the first thing that you are about to do then is, of course, to reduce delay. So the first thing we did was that we started to transmit ECG so that everyone was prepared when the patient came to the hospital to start giving the treatment. So we moved the diagnosis into the transport sector. But when we have done that, we could take next step. If this patient should have thrombolytics, we could move the treatment to the ambulance. So if they sent the ECG and the doctor said, this is okay, give the patient thrombolytics, then they could start already in the ambulance. So we saved even more time. And when it came to this thing about PCI, The thing was that we could not give thrombolysis to these patients, so then we needed to decide, okay, is this a candidate for PCI? Then we need to make sure that we go as quickly to the hospital where they can do this. And that is not always every hospital, so you need to take the right road in order to get to the right hospital as quick as possible. And in order to do this, you need to have a 12-lead ECG. So this is what you transmit. It's you put on some electrodes and transmit something called a 12-lead ECG. It looks like this. And what you especially look at is what is called ST elevations. That is what you see here. Usually it should be like the red one here. And the blue one tells you that there is an ST elevation. This part is called T wave. And if you have any elevation there, it's a sign that you have ischemia in the heart muscle. So that is very essential to see. And this is just to tell you what such a MobiMed system could look like. You had several ambulances transmitting using whatever was around to some kind of server, and then we could connect that to several hospitals, etc. This is an old slide, so it's not that important to look at it in detail, but I usually say that we have used any communication system that is around, from satellites to ordinary telephone networks and whatever. And out here we also have used mobile communication. So we have used Bluetooth for connecting this measuring unit with a PC platform of some type, usually some type of tablet. And has this made any changes? Yes, this is just an example of what has happened. I've already mentioned this, I think. But if you look at figures in the 2011, they saw that we had reduced the death rate for myocardial infarction with 50% since the 1990s. And this was during the time when these type of treatments were introduced, but also when this type of system we designed were also rolled out in Sweden. I think that for a while we had some 75% of the Swedish ambulances covered, and the rest had something else. So this all happened at the same time. But by using this type of equipment and combining that with new therapy methods, we could reduce with 50%. And a lot of people also survived, which they wouldn't have done earlier. So again, this is and got better out of the hospital. So this is really what can be done. We made another test in a small area in Germany close to Düsseldorf, about the size of Gothenburg, where we tested our system solution and compared it with what they did before. And by using our solution the whole way, we could see that in our system the 30-day mortality was 4.8%. And without that, when they did like they had done before, they had 14.6% mortality after 30 days. So it was a very big difference. And if you do some calculations and like a lot of estimations, this could mean in this area about 65 cases a year. That's the difference between making a more efficient logistics, so to speak, than working in the old way. And the reason for this was that we got a little bit quicker to the table where they could do PCI. And since most of the heart muscle dies in the beginning, we could really work on the steepest slope of the curve. So improving just like 20 minutes or something like that was that important. I told you that I'm involved in something called pre-hospital ICT arena at Lindholmen, and now I will tell you of some of the projects we are running there. The whole idea with this is to promote using ICT and e-health in the pre-hospital care. And the first project we did there was something called pre-hospit. And it was about harmonization of the semantic and technical interoperability in the pre-hospital care chain. And we looked at stroke from the very beginning. This project has stopped now, but the whole idea was that when we talked with a lot of actors in this area, we asked them, what is the biggest problem? Why doesn't things work? They said, we cannot get the information to flow along the care process in both directions, from ambulances into hospital, but also bringing out information from the hospital that could be interesting in order to evaluate the patient right now, like old electronic patient records. If we, for instance, have a stroke patient there, it's good to see if they have had a stroke before or something else that could be the cause for this. So we set up a project in order to look at this. And we did that project in 3 steps. First, we did an analysis of what is the need. We looked at the care processes. We looked at what information is needed in different steps in order to take good decisions. And we also looked at international standards and gave a recommendation what to use in order to be able to exchange information from all those systems that were involved. Then we tested these solutions and this recommendation. And finally, we did a clinical evaluation. And I usually say that this is what it's all about. Agree on track with them wagon couplings. That sounds easy, but it's not easy. People are still, we are in a situation where we can easily exchange information between all different systems, not even in Sweden, not even in this region. But we are going in that direction. It goes slow, but we are going in that direction. I had 21 parties involved in this project, a bit tricky to handle, but they represented all of them very important parts in the whole sector. And this is the mapping we did on the stroke process and saw what information is interesting to have at different parts. We also saw that video conference could be an option, for instance. And yeah. So the first thing ended up in, I will not go into detail, but we found that we should use those standards like Snowman CT as something that is very commonly used here. HL7 is also a standard that is very important to know about when you come into this area. Today there is something called FIRE that is very popular to use, but it's part of HL7. And we tested it in a way that's called something called IHE, Integrating the Healthcare Enterprise. They have something called connectathons. It's like a big hackathon. You bring together all systems, you decide on different type of care processes, and then you run protocols to see whether different parties and products can talk with each other and you can transmit information. And we did our own small connectathon with those companies involved. And in the 3rd step, we did full field tests, but we did that using simulations. So we did full-scale simulations using different ambulance crews with the simulated patients, starting with call taking. They went on route. That means that they went into an ambulance, and we had a simulator in the front, so they were driving out, and it took as long time as an ordinary call could take, where they could talk with each other, prepare for what was coming up. We had mannequins at the scene and had different types of problems. We took them into the ambulance and made a transport with the simulator again, and then we entered a hospital. And all the way here we could videotape everything that happened and analyze how they used the IT support, etc., and compare that with not having IT support. So this was very, very good way of working. We skipped this because I would like to tell you about one more example. This is something we are doing right now here in this region. It's a project called VIPS, Video Support in the Pre-Hospital Stroke Chain. And again, we started up that we thought that video conference could be a good thing to use for making a better assessment of the patient in the ambulance in order to take the patient. And in the same way, it's very close to what we did with the myocardial infarction patient. You have 2 different types of treatment to give people with ischemic stroke. One is, again, thrombolytic treatment. This is this drug that dissolves the clot. Or you can do thrombectomy, which is going up with a catheter into the brain and pull out the plug that is there. And if it's a big stroke in a big vessel, this is the one thing you want to do. But this can only be done at one hospital in the whole region, and that is at Sahlgrenska. And again, time is essential. So for every hour we lost, we halves the effect of this treatment. So it's important for us to early define which patients are candidates to go to Sahlgrenska. But at the same time, if they shall not go to Sahlgrenska, if they would be better if we took them to the nearest hospital, we must be able to make that decision as well. So this is what it looks here in this region. You can see all the hospitals. These hospitals with yellow rings around them can do thrombolysis, and this is the only place for thrombectomy. And guess if we have a patient up here, how should we decide whether we should go directly to Lect10 and give thrombolysis, or find that that isn't enough, we want to go to Sahlgrenska? Or how can we take a decision to go directly and save between 1 and 2 hours? So the thing to do that is to help the people in the ambulance to make a better decision, because there are no easy ways for the ambulance crew to decide this by their own. But if they can connect to a stroke expert sitting here in Gothenburg, they together can make better assessment of the patient and make this type of decision. And right now we are running our first clinical trials. We are starting up right now. The first ambulance goes live on Monday. We have educated every person involved, some 100 people, etc. And we will have now ambulances here in Ulricehamn and in Skene. And they can have to make the decisions whether they should go to CS i Borås or if they should go to Sahlgrenska. So we have now built up a complete care chain for this with stroke, backup experts and things like that. And these are the people involved in this. Okay, I think I stopped there. I have more examples, but you will see them in the master's course. Thank you.
So before I release your boss here, can I ask you a few questions? So you said that the main problem in one of the projects there was to determine width of the rail tracks and so forth. So is this to be interpreted as the way data is represented in different systems?
Yeah, it's both the semantic and the technical interoperability, because you also need to understand that the right leg means the right leg in the other systems as well. So that's one of the parts, and the other thing is standard technical interoperability. And there are standardized protocols, etc. But for one way or another, people have always tried to develop their own because this doesn't fit our needs. So instead of using someone that's out there and try to improve that, they have started to develop a new one. But now things are looking much better, and it seems that people are starting to use approximately the same all over the world right now. And also it is very important when you have those standards, as with all standards, that there is support for maintaining and improving them. So those I mentioned, for instance, SNOMED CT, which is about semantics, and HL7 have strong user groups, international user groups that supports them. And looking into the pre-hospital sector, you can say that a lot of the things that are used there are not yet represented in those standards. But again, since there is a process for bringing them in, we think that it's better trying to start using them and trying to get it into the standards.
So the second thing I wanted to ask in the video conferencing issue here. So here, what is most important for the communication system here? Is it coverage, that is availability and wherever, or is it data rate, or is it delay? So what would you say is the main challenge here?
Everything is very important there. The most important thing, in fact, in one way, is that for those using the system is to know whether the system works or not. It's very important that when the way we have designed the process right now, they bring the patient down to the ambulance and that hook it up to the stroke expert. And if they see that it doesn't work, they shouldn't spend any time. They should go back to the old routines. So, and when in this solution also, we don't send information when the car is moving around or the ambulance is moving around, because you cannot do those neurological examinations in a moving car, because you should raise your hand or follow the fingers or something like that. So if you have a contact when you start, it's fairly good with just standard 4G, because that's what we are using. We did some tests with the bonded 4G solutions, because that could give us a chance to get more bandwidth and also use different operators. Bonded is that you use different operators in order to make use of several parallel tracks, so to speak. And those
you have the same bunch of SIM cards in the same device.
Yeah, you have some, maybe 2, 3, or even 4 SIM cards. And then if one doesn't work, you can go over to another operator, but you can also bring them together to get more bandwidth. But we found that gave us delays and stuff, and it was not really needed here. So these are the kind of tests we have been doing before going clinical. And another thing before going clinical, which I didn't mention, is that we also did simulations first in order to decide how the process should look like. And if what camera positions to use. Now we have 3 cameras, for instance, and we found out by talking to the stroke expert that this was a good way to work. So there are a lot of things, and I would say that education is also a tricky thing, because if you go into bigger ambulance organizations, there are hundreds of people to educate. And there's a lot of people coming and going, so this is a tricky part when setting up this type of systems. So our next goal now, which we have started to discuss, is to increase this clinical test here in the Västra Götaland region up to 10 or 12 ambulances, and using another type of video solution, which is the standard that is used in the IT environment they have in this region. And that looks very interesting, because then it will be like a virtual meeting room in the ambulance. You can go in from many different platforms wherever you are in the region to look into the ambulance. So that will give us new opportunities, and then we will probably look at trauma and other applications as well.
Any other questions?
Otherwise, visit our website, because there you can read on the other stuff. I didn't mention about the AI project right now, so there you can look at it.